This is Daisy Margaret.
In today's video, we are about to discuss Class 8, Unit 19, Movement in Animals, Part 3. Topics to be discussed: types of movements, joints, and synovial joints. Types of movements. When we talk about locomotion and movement, there are three types of movements. So we have three types of movements. The three types of movements are Amoeboid movement, ciliary movement, and muscular movement. These are the three types of movements, and we are going to discuss about that. Amoeboid movement. It is brought about by pseudopodia, which are appendages which move with movement of protoplasm within a cell. What are appendages? Appendages are attachment or the joining. Okay, so it is with the pseudopodia which help them to move the protoplasm. So it is brought about by pseudopodia, which are appendages. So they are appendages which move with the movement of protoplasm within a cell. Ciliary movement. This movement is brought about by appendages called cilia, which are the hair-like extensions of epithelium. Both these kinds of movements are seen with cells of the lymphatic system. So, ciliary movement is the movement of cilia. The example for that is paramecium. Muscular movement. It is a more complex movement which is brought about by the musculoskeletal system. This type of movement is seen in the higher vertebrates. So it is a very difficult movement. So it is brought about by musculoskeletal system. So this type of movement is usually seen in the higher vertebrates. To understand more about the movements brought about by the musculoskeletal system, we need to understand the joints, skeleton, and types of muscles. Joints. The point at which two separate bones meet is called a joint. Depending on the type of movement they allow, joints can be of three types: fixed, slightly movable, and movable joints. So, what are joints? Joints are the points at which two separate bones meet is called a joint. Then, depending upon the type of movement they allow, the joint they are classified into three types. So, this fixed joints, slightly movable joints, and movable joints. Fixed or immovable joints. In this type of joint, no movement is possible between the two bones. The structures between the bones of the skull box are examples of immovable joints. So you can see here the example of fixed or immovable joints is skull box. Okay, so in this type of joint, no movement is possible between the two bones. It cannot be moved. So the structure between the bones of skull box are examples of immovable joints. Slightly movable joints. Here only very little partial movement occurs between the two bones. The joint between a rib and the breastbone or between the vertebrae is the example for slightly movable joint. So what is slightly movable joints? Only a very little movement occurs between the two bones. So the joint between the rib and the breastbone and the joint between the vertebrae is the example for slightly movable joint. Freely movable joints. In this type, varying degree of movements is possible between the two bones forming the joint. There are 6 major types of movable joints. They are ball and socket, pivot, saddle, condyloid, hinge, gliding. These are the 6 major types of movable joints. So you can see here the joint, an example for it, description, and the movement is given here in the tabular column. The first one, ball and socket. The examples are shoulder and hip. Description: a ball shaped head of one bone articulates with a cup like socket of an adjacent bone. Movement can occur in three planes. This joint allows the greatest range of movement. The second one, hinge. The examples are elbow, knee, and ankle. A cylindrical protrusion of one bone articulates with a trough shaped depression of an adjacent bone. Mobility: movement is restricted to one plane. This joint allows bending and straightening only. Pivot: spine, atlas, axis joint at the top. A rounded and pointed structure of one bone articulates with a ring shaped structure of radius, ulna, and adjacent bone. Movement is restricted to one plane. This joint allows a rotation about its longitudinal axis only. Condyloid, example, wrist, similar to a ball and socket joint but with much flatter articulating surfaces forming a much shallower joint. Mobility: movement can occur in two planes. This joint allows the second greatest range of movement. Next one, gliding, spine between the bony processes of the vertebrae. Articulating surfaces are almost flat and of a similar size. Gliding allows movement in three planes, but it is severely limited. And the last one, saddle, thumb, shoulder, and inner ear. One part is concave, turned inward at one end and looks like a saddle. The other end is convex, turned outward, and it looks like a rider in the saddle. Flexion, extension, and abduction, adduction movements are seen. So you can see here the types of joints in human. Synovial joints. A synovial joint is a joint which makes connection between two bones consisting of a cartilage lined cavity filled with fluid, which is known as a diathesis joint. So cartilage is a connective tissue. It is a flexible tissue. Cavity means empty space within a solid object. Okay, so it is also called as diathesis. So it is a freely movable joint. Synovial joint is also called as diathesis. It is also called as a freely movable joint. A synovial joint, it is making connections between two bones where it has cartilage lined cavity filled with fluid. So you can see here in this part. So this is the cavity. Okay, so this is the cavity. So it is an empty space within a solid object. So this cartilage, it is a connective tissue. Oh, so synovial joint is a joint where it makes connection between the two bones, where you have the cartilage lined cavity filled with fluid. So it is also called as what? It is also called as diathesis. So you can see here synovial joint. So this is the spongy bone and this is another bone. Okay, so this is called as synovial membrane. So this is the joint cavity filled with synovial fluid. This is the articular cartilage and this is the joint capsule. Okay, so here are the parts of the synovial joint. So here where the synovial joint will be there. So the bones not bound together, it is separated by synovial cavity, all diathrotic or freely moving joints. These are the most flexible type of joint between bones because the bones are not physically connected and can move more freely in relation to each other. So synovial joints have four main distinguishing features. The four distinguishing features are articular cartilage, ligament, synovial fluid, joint capsule. These are the four main distinguishing features. Feature of synovial joint. So we have the first feature as ligament. So it is the structure is a band of strong fibrous tissue. So the function of ligament is to connect bone to bone. What is a ligament? How it functions? It is connecting bone to bone. The next one is synovial fluid. So it is a slippery fluid with consistency of egg whites that is contained within the joint cavity. So the function of synovial fluid is to reduce friction between the articular cartilage in the joint. Third one, articular cartilage. So this is glassy smooth cartilage that is spongy and covers the ends of the bones in the joint. The function of articular cartilage is to absorb shock and to prevent friction between the ends of the bones in the joint. And finally, the last one, joint capsule, a tough fibrous tissue that has two layers with the fibrous capsule lying outside the synovial membrane. The fibrous capsule helps to strengthen the joint while the synovial membrane lines the joint and secretes synovial fluid. So that is the function of joint capsule. Do you know? Inflammation of joints is a condition that usually results either due to friction of articulating cartilage or due to lack of synovial fluid in the joint. So, what is inflammation? Inflammation is a redness, swelling, pain, or tenderness, heat, and disturbed function of an area of the body. So, this inflammation of the joint is a condition where it usually results due to friction of articulating cartilage or due to the lack of synovial fluid that is secreted in the joint. Okay, so during this condition the person feels acute pain in the joints, particularly while moving the joints. This disease is referred to as arthritis. Arthritis is, however, also caused due to the deposition of uric acid crystals in the joints. Summary of the video, we discussed about types of movements, joints and synovial joints. This is to be continued. If you like the video, please do like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.